Today we're going to talk about this watercolor skill practice sheet. The purpose of this sheet is to explore some new techniques and maybe see some techniques that you like that you want to try on a actual piece of art, and maybe just play around with the paint a little bit, okay? So we've got 6 different techniques that I want you to try, and then there's an area for free choice, free exploration. So let me zoom you in close so you can see the techniques really good. Okay, the first technique that we're going to try is tape masking. That's where you take some tape, usually it's painter's tape or masking tape, and you put it down where you don't want the paint to go. Okay, this type of technique is really good when you want a precise shape or a precise point. I'm just kind of putting a random shape there. But then you paint over it. Some paint here. Now you don't have to paint over the tape completely, but I would paint all the way up to the edge. This technique can also be fun when you're creating landscapes, different landscapes, or a geometric sort of art piece. That would be nice too. Now the type of paper you're painting on today is cardstock, so it's going to hold up pretty well to the paint, but not as good as watercolor paper. So be careful to not get the paper too wet, okay? Next, we're going to move on to blot. Blot is really good when you want to add some texture in your painting. So like if you were painting some water, that might be a nice one to use. So what you do is you take a paper towel and you kind of crinkle it up. And then what we're going to do is we're going to paint on the paper and then take our paper towel and blot up the areas that we kind of want white. So I'm going to do a mix here. I'm going to toss some blue and toss some purple down here. And it dries pretty quickly, so I'm kind of moving fast. And then I'm going to blot. So you can see that paint that I'm pulling up. Okay. Another technique is crayon resist. So that's putting down marks with a crayon. Any color's good. I always just love using white for some reason because it feels like magic to me. So I push pretty hard when I do that. And then after, you just pop some paint on top, and the places where you put crayon will resist the paint. And the places where you didn't put crayon, that's where your paint will go. Okay, we've got 3 more. First, we're gonna try dry on wet. That's really good for soft lines and shapes. Now what that means is you take your brush and you lay some water down on your paper first. Just a little bit. And then after that, you can do some different shapes or whatever it is that you're painting, and you see how it's very soft. It's not a very rigid line. It's not a very precise line like you're gonna get with the tape masking. Now, if I were to paint like a blue circle inside of this right now, it would mix. But if I waited until later, after this dried, I could paint on top of this. Okay, so that's dry on wet. Wet on wet is one of my favorite ways to paint. It's good for washes and gradients, and also good for puddle painting. So what you do for that is you get your paper really wet, and then you get your paintbrush really wet with paint. And one thing you can kind of do is just sort of tap. And this is called actually puddle painting. You don't have to do the tapping like I'm doing. You could also go back and forth. I like to do tapping when I'm doing the wet on wet. And when that dries, it's kind of like puddles, or some people call it cauliflowering. Okay, And the last technique I want you to try is dry on dry. So for dry on dry, your paper is going to be dry. You want to make sure your paintbrush is also relatively dry and not too watery when you pick up the paint. So this is really good for if you want some precise lines. Also pretty bold color. Like this color is the same as this color, but it's quite light here because of the extra water. It's more bold here and more precise than this because of the extra water. So all of these techniques are really great. It just depends on what you're trying to paint. So give these a try, and then after that, you can do some experimenting at the bottom and see what you like.